Okay, welcome to another episode of the Magic Yogi Podcast. And got a real special edition going on today. Got an old friend of mine, Alfredo Vargas, who's coming on to talk to us about a book he wrote. And there's going to be a lot to unpack, so I hope you're all ready for a long, interesting ride. And, just as a disclaimer, the topics we're going into could be triggering to some if you have, if you have strong attachments to certain ways of thinking. But anyways, before we get into the show, I just want to give a quick shout out to a friend of the podcast. They're a t-shirt company. Now you might say like, oh, well, what's so interesting about that? Is that their designs, they're called the Red Ear Go Company. And their website is www.redeargo.com. Their designs are based off of the board game Go, or as it's called, Baduk or Wei Chi. And they have designs that are kind of tongue-in-cheek, humorous, kind of funny designs based off the game that have, references and such. So yeah, go check them out and see what kind of things they have. I'm sure you could find something interesting. Oh, okay, that's better. Okay, so Alfredo, why don't you kind of tell us why you're here and what motivated you to come out and start introducing your book to people?
Well, the book is about the nature of reality, and it didn't mean to be the nobody book, but now as I look back, I realize that it might be the nobody book, unintentionally. This character that is talked about in GOP and other places. It took me 22 years. The idea began in 1999. I was 19 years old. I began questioning, what was all this? Why are we here? And it was an evolution of reading and learning and meditation, and it just came to be what it is.
So, So in case there's people that don't really know what the nobody is, the nobody is kind of a meme or a story that's been floating around the internet in different places where people talk about esoteric things or talk about metaphysical things or spiritual topics. And simply it's kind of the idea that there's a person or some group of people that have been able to, or that I guess like a way to think about it is a group of people that have kind of started on some kind of next stage in human evolution, and that it's such a hard thing to break down into just one thing or one idea.
It's in essence the new thought form for the new age.
Yeah,
humanity.
It's like an archetype for a new type of new way of thinking, a person that sees the world in a different way and is kind of free from limitations that used to be that used to hold back humanity, I guess.
Let me just say this is going to be a delicious conversation. I have my incense here with my magic box. I have my bottle of sangria. So yeah. We're going to enjoy it.
Okay, so so when you were saying that you you didn't foresee your book being about this kind of mythological character, but it kind of naturally followed into that way of thinking. But that, I think that's kind of because that story is kind of put together so that I think most people that are, truth seekers and who are into, studying things like the occult and, connections between world religions and, the origins of those kind of ways of thinking and where different traditions came from, that I think people who study those things a lot will eventually kind of agree with or feel like they relate to this character that's been floating around in these places. Because even though there isn't
I could say that Jesus Christ was the image, the idea, the thought form of the previous period. Nobody will be the new actualization, the new program for humanity. It will be a new blueprint that can deliver a new state of reality based in creating a new state of being. So nobody is a new self. We're basically talking about a being that humanity will be one day. He's the future, and we will reach him. So, so this book, intentionally, now that I can look back, and now that the book is finished, I realized that it was always about him. Very strange. So the book took 22 years to write. It's not something that came in a few years. Mm-hmm. And it's a story of one eternity. There are many eternities. I believe there are many universes in which stories unfold. This universe is just one chapter, one story of a previous universe, a previous reality, a multiverse. Mm-hmm. So in this universe, the story of the nobody, which implicates everyone, because everyone is him. He is him. Yeah, we are him. You know what I mean? I would like to read the first 2.5 pages because I think those are the most important. Just read a piece and then we talk about it, and then read another piece and then talk about it.
Okay, just before you start reading those, I think it's important to let people know kind of where our perspectives come from, because I think you have a real big, strong grounding in kind of Western esotericism, and kind of the different mystery schools and the things that they the teachings they had. I know you've studied those kind of things a lot, and I don't know too much about those kind of things, but I do know a lot about Eastern occultism and like the yogic traditions, and what they call kind of the background that people used to call Hinduism, and those kind of older energy work traditions, and their knowledge about self-knowledge and the nature of reality. So I think when we talk about these things, it's kind of good that we're kind of coming from two different sides of the same topic.
My conclusion now has come that India, of those type of belief systems, are the most accurate. Now that my attempt is to understand the universal understanding of mankind, the whole knowledge. I believe different systems have different pieces of the puzzle that you have to learn and combine and actualize through yourself. So I'm seeking to understand basically the whole universal knowledge of mankind. I think that's the way to unify the whole thing into an ultimate perspective. So I'm very interested in what you know, what you have learned. I'm now getting interested in Asia and India. I see myself more closer to them now as I develop it myself,
And I think one of the things that we both met on a common ground was the idea that there's a how would you say, there's a worldview, or there's a a view of the unseen world that transcends cultural boundaries, that transcends, religious traditions and rituals and anything that happens in the physical world. And so that's why I kind of noticed that over time, different people that I've met who were interested in these topics, if they spent enough time, there were similar spaces that they got into, But like you were saying, it would probably be a good idea if you read the first, you're saying first 2 pages of your book.
First 2.5 pages will lead into a lot of stuff, and then we can move out. After that, we can move the book as you like at different parts that you're interested. I'm sure you have questions.
Yep. And then after you read those 2, then we can kind of try to start introducing what the book is about. Because, it's easy to say that, it's a story about creation of the universe, but in that there's a lot of it that it's, it's more than just that story. There's a lot more that's kind of in it that you packed in there. So after you read a little bit about it, we'll start kind of unpacking what it's about, what the real plot is.
My seeking is to transcend, become the real human being, which transcends nationality, ethnicity, environmental, social structures, religion. You see, when we see a religion, when we see different places on the planet, we see different religious systems. These religious systems are simply programs for the population. Mm-hmm. You see, they don't realize it, but that's what it is. So a real human being will transcend social systems, religious structures, will begin to see its own nature. It will begin to use its inner self to reason, beyond nationality or culture. Mm-hmm. So this is what my body is. This is what I am. As you can see, I don't attach myself to, I don't represent a culture. I don't represent a specific group of people. I'm kind of a strange anomaly, which what I seek is to become a universal human being, cosmic, stellar. So that's what the nobody is also. The ascension beyond the current structures of program. Become the real human being. And I guess to a degree this book is about that. Why I say the nobody is about the nobody to a sense, to a degree. It's the natural thing.
And it's because wherever the nobody meme or story came from, it ended up being a story about that, about any kind of individual. There's a big debate, whether it's one person or a lot, but it's a story about an individual that gets to that state where they're seeking, a state of freedom, beyond all of the conditioning that they've kind of come to recognize, the story of kind of seeing the bars for the first time and realizing the limitations and the kind of harmful mental conditioning that society's put onto people. And then there's a whole other aspect of it too that's more metaphysical. That's about a person regaining the self-knowledge of what humanity's true identity is as creators of the reality of awareness of our conscious experience, and the idea of taking responsibility for that.
Exactly. Humanity has forget to know thyself, be conscious, and take responsibility not only for its liberation, salvation, but for the manifestation of the world. The current world is the expression, the mirror of our own inner collective self. What we are, what we believe, is manifested in the world. So the nobody is basically the self that becomes self-aware, becomes self-conscious, and gains the divine within. Through that divine within begins to alter himself and his environment. Eventually, if it's possible, maybe change the thought form, the idea of self or humanity, and transform the world so humanity can become as him. This is not like the old Christ where Christ is God and nobody can ever reach him. And, basically the nobody is about humanity becoming as he is and use the powers that are inherent in humanity, in each of us, to change and transform the whole world and become more than just what we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of people these days that are starting to argue that if there was a historical Christ, that they most likely were a teacher of inner alchemy and self-knowledge, and that the historical person probably was someone who was trying to bring others along into their state. And that, I mean, there's so many stories about it, but the one I personally like is the idea that he was, the son of, some kind of royalty in the Levant around that area, and that he eventually was disillusioned by his position and went, on a journey to find spiritual teachers, eventually made it to, say, the Himalayas and different places, learned, these kind of techniques for cultivating these kind of subtle energies and things like the Kundalini, energy, and using chakra systems, whether it could be that or something else, but but learning these kind of secret things and then coming back into society to try to dispense them to the common people. I think that general story there could have been one person who did that at a point, who kind of gave rise to different stories of these so-called messiahs, even though they might not have even thought of themselves like that. It might have been a more practical.
We can see that we can see 2,000 years of history and what the Christ has done to humanity, to the areas where it has influenced. It has brought ignorance, suffering, violence, death. So then nobody represents the end of the structure of thinking, the thought form, and the commencement of something new, where humanity becomes God. It's no longer restrained by another God, but it becomes the inner God, God himself, and therefore is able to manifest the powers of God. That's what the nobody is, the self-awakening into the divine. It's a whole new game now. So it is his destiny.
There's maybe the idea that if there was a guy like that who was a Christ, that maybe his whole image and idea got hijacked, by forces that, used the energy of that, maybe that devotion of that person to kind of construct some kind of mental trap that you could call.
And therefore now all the Christ and no Christianity, no systems which come from that are corrupted. There's no way to restructure it. It will only lead into more corruption and to more collapse. It's over. Christ is done. It's a thought form from the past. The introduction of the nobody is the introduction of the new age, of a new humanity and a new world order.
Yeah. And
perhaps worldwide.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes I hear about people that want to try to restructure, Christian church. But the thing is too, is if you're in that church and you feel like you have whatever the original doctrine was, you're in for, years of war to try to, to try to change that whole inertia and force of all the people that are devoted to all these different, like I said, mental traps. I don't want to, if anyone is Christian that listens to this, I'm sorry, but we can't go without. I'm not gonna try to not offend people, because I have.
If you don't offend people, you cannot make progress.
Well, that's the thing too, is I'm a lot like you, and I think anyone who's heard, my podcast knows that even though I grew up being really immersed in the traditional culture of Native Americans in my area. Once I grew up, I didn't ever identify with any group. I never identified with a race or, any kind of way of thinking or spiritual system. I always just considered myself, a being. I never attached myself to those kind of things. So I was never afraid
That's exactly
of exploring. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do, to supersede the race, the nationality, the ethnicity, to become cosmic, universal planetary human being. Mm-hmm. This is where we're supposed to go. No longer a national from this country, from that country, but a citizen of the world.
And that doesn't mean losing your individuality, though. That doesn't mean you become a robot. It just means that you're not you're not accepting a program. You're creating your own system,
Exactly. Now when you become a cosmic being, you're no longer limited to territorial constructs of whatever society is in that. Now you become a cosmic, meaning you have the capacity to access eternity, all information, all systems, and actualize. Imagine a human being like that. That is the future. Humanity will be like that in 100 years if nobody, these ideas are spread and humanity grows with it. Imagine humanity which can access the infinitum and all universal information and all systems and actualize within its own energy and create a real human being, unlimited, infinite, powerful, no longer trapped by duality of good and evil, but beyond that. I think what we're talking about it, very deep stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you want to start going through the first first pages?
Let's do the first 2.5 pages.
Okay, then we'll start going through, like I said, kind of who the protagonist is and kind of what the plot actually is, because it's kind of, the whole idea of, the creation of the universe. That's kind of the backdrop. That's kind of like what's going on in the background. The real story is more about this, the self. It's about that journey of the self through, these different experiences and these transformations that this being goes through, which is how you were saying. It's yourself, it's the reader, it's the nobody. It's trying to represent that kind of universal self. Right?
The title is The History of the Forever Time. It means the history of eternity. It's beyond a cosmos, beyond this universe, beyond the time of this reality. A universe is nothing more than a moment. The time this universe has existed is just a very, very, very short time in comparison to all the totality of time. I could say that the universe has existed only for less than the time that the lightning lasts. How long is that? Less than 1 second, no? Mm-hmm. So we had existed, all this universe, all these billions of years had only been but a moment. This universe is but a drop of water, a little drop of energy and matter in a much higher extension and expansion of reality. So the title alone is History of the Forever Time, History of Eternity, meaning in the beginning there was I am, whose self-characteristics manifested as an endless eternity, with time without time and space in potentiality, but extended in all directions forever, an endless void who was, a dreamer who dreamed ceaselessly to escape eternity in such void, if at least for a time, the consciousness of many experiences fused into one in him. In him was all that ever was, characters, universes, worlds, and infinity. Now, what will we talk about? So I read a small space and then we talk about it. What do you think?
What's that?
What I just read. Yeah. So we have this character, that is pure consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and is all universe, all infinity in him. So he is there. One day he decided he wanted to feel and know that which had been invisible for him to experience. It had been unknown for as long as he had been. And this experience was several. He craved to experience death and non-existence. A such thing was to this point unattainable, as he could not die. He wanted to know an individual separate of himself, but how, for all that ever was fused to him in oneness. He wanted to feel himself as creation and creator at the same time, but how, for he was always aware of being a creator. And lastly, he wanted to know what limitation was. He was always limitless and omnipresent. How could he solve such complex impossibles? But for one who has forever to think, nothing is really impossible. So for a time, which was a moment and forever at the same time, he thought about it. And after a while, Eureka, he knew how. He had to create a cosmos as countless ones before, a simulation in experience, and in it, he had to forget who he was. This had to be done layer by layer, meaning he had to produce a large quantity of beings that could be him, each with less experience of the totality of himself, until he could reach one final being who will not know who he was in relation to the totality. And with him, he will finally know death, limitation, individuality, and experience of being a creation. But to ensure he could awake and know himself and actualize the information of himself, and all that he did once all these things had been experienced, he was going to leave clues about himself that eventually were to lead to his awakening. Those clues was going to live high in two places, the creation of things and deep in his inner self. So let's talk about that paragraph.
So like I was saying, the protagonist of the story is this kind of you would call like undivided awareness. This kind of just this field of conscious energy that that in order to, it has the entire thing the entire story begins with a desire to be able to feel something, to be able to experience something. Because when you think about it, if there's a field of awareness where there's nothing other than that thing, then there's no way to experience anything, because there's no difference between anything. There's no conflict, there's no separation. And in order to feel any of those things, it has to go through a process of limitation. And the only way to get that experience is through division and through making itself less than it is. It's something that's completely omnipotent and full, and doesn't need anything, and exists without there being an inside or outside. It's just it's a hard thing to describe, because it's the same topic that I've encountered in yogic teachings, that the real nature of the self is this undifferentiated kind of still state of awareness with no divisions and no movement. Because how could there be movement if there's no different substances? So
and all this, this story came ironically through a lot of meditation. Is that what came from me? It was not something I read anywhere. It was an intuition that came from a long period of meditation and inward, expression and exploration. Basically, it's a natural intuition within me that came into this book. So imagine this being that is eternal and and he has no capacity to experience death. I mean, for him, it's impossible to experience death. It's impossible for him to experience uh, moving from one point to another. That is not possible because he's all things. It's impossible for him to experience limitation of any type because whatever he wants, he manifests. Mm-hmm. So for a being that is eternal and unlimited, like you say, the only way to experience those things is to forget himself and create an environment, a dimension where he no longer can be what he is, but is something else. And that something else is constrained by physical, spatial limitations that allows him to experience such unimaginable reality, I think this being, yes.
Oh, I was gonna say the book that your book really reminded me of, that was one of my favorite books when I was doing a lot of studying about yoga things, is a book called Yoga Vasista. It's in the other room. I would show it to you, but it's a book. It's kind of well known as being one of the, I think it's something like the third oldest, or I mean the longest book that is like has survived from old Indian texts. And it's a book about, it's basically like a conversation between a teacher and a student. And the entire book starts off with a prince named Rama, who is, lives a really privileged life and eventually, kind of becomes disillusioned with having, all the privileges of being a prince of, a royal family. And so in this story, he eventually his father, who's a king, becomes really concerned about his son, and so he gets a spiritual teacher to come and have a conversation with him. And the whole book is all just kind of a transcript of this, and it goes through this teacher explaining to him that all these troubles and all the ways that he's kind of despairing over the bad things in the world are just a result of the limitations of his perception, and that if he can raise himself to a higher level of awareness, that he can overcome, these things that are bothering him.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of like kind of sounds, and I notice it's your thing's blinking with the sounds. I don't know.
There is people outside, that that children, but they're quiet as the time goes by. But I think it's fine. I'm good. I'm hearing you very well, and
okay,
let's keep going. Don't worry.
But so your book really reminded me of that. It reminded me of the idea that there's a certain point that people can reach in the normal kind of conscious material existence that can push them towards the understanding that there's something past the material world. And that what I was getting to was that the core kind of moral of that yogic book is that there's the dissatisfaction of that comes with the material world, and the feeling of kind of the futility of how temporary and fragile material existence is, pushes people towards like understanding that maybe this isn't as real of an existence as we think it is.
This is why I find it so futile to concentrate myself on wealth or prestige or the life in this world, because I'll be dead in a few decades, Look at a Bill Gates or a John McCain or what's the name of this guy that kind of work on the phones, the Apple phones that's already did? Steve.
Or like Elon Musk, these guys that try to be, really larger than life and building empires kind of thing.
But they're so wealthy, they're so powerful. But all this is going to end, in less than 100 years. Most of the people that are here are going to be dead. There will be other human beings, other lives, living this world as real. What would be the point? So I think the real meaning to be here, of this life is to develop one's consciousness, one's spirituality. This is the real work. Because not to do so is to lose one's life. I mean, it's to waste one time. This is so temporary. This is an illusion. This is Maya. This is Maya because nothing that is not real can be, because anything that is real cannot be so temporary. I mean, I can die tomorrow. I don't even have to last 20, 30 more years, because it's so temporary. It's just, it shows by this that it's just unreal. And therefore, to waste one's life into procreation, into wealth, into the activities of this world is how can I say, idiotic?
In the yogic tradition, they say that, people go through as many lives as they need to until they recognize that what they're experiencing is a dream, or that it's pretty similar to the dream, or there's no way to tell between waking and dream life. And that, there's even sayings that if someone, is, I think I might have told you about this, but that if someone's on the road towards self-knowledge, and if they start heading towards recognizing what's real and what's illusion and what the makeup of reality is, if something happens and they die, in their next life, they'll already be a little bit in a better position to move towards that knowledge.
I think the beginning of awakening is the recognition that this reality is dream, a vision, a temporary state. That this is a transition to something else. Just like in a dream, when you start dreaming and you're not aware that you're dreaming, you see this reality in front of you. Maybe a planet, an environment. If you not become aware that it's a dream, you don't know when it begins. You're simply there, and you're participating in the dream, in the game, in the dream. It's unless you become conscious that it's a dream, you cannot manipulate, you cannot escape it, you cannot supersede it. I guess the beginning of the end is to become disillusion from this world, to no longer seek his desires, his nature, because one can understand that it's meaningless, it's in vain. I, for example, no longer looking for anything here. This is just a momentary stage into my new reality that will come after that, after this body finally concludes. This reality will not be based on a God, the paradise, but it will be based in my own inner imagination and consciousness. It will be a construct of my own self. See, that's the difference between, let's say, a Christian or a Muslim. These people are still trapped in delusion. This is why they reproduce. This is why they chain themselves to this entire simulation, of feelings and senses and constructs. And when they die, their consciousness is simply, because they cannot stand as God, they cannot stand as a self-individuality. They just probably are thrown back in here into, like you say, into a new life, according to their own state of evolution.
Yep, and for the tradition that I teach from, and the Kriya Yoga that I spread out to people, in that tradition, they say that, the ultimate goal of life is to escape reincarnation. That's actually the ultimate, if you break it down to the end, it's to make sure you don't have to be born again. That's actually the original thing. There's in the groups that we talk in, and the places that we go, there's the concept of anti-natalism, and the idea that, that we should limit people being born, and that that birth isn't necessarily the best thing that happens. It just means that there's someone who's in an ongoing journey through this process of awareness. And that, there's that in these traditions that I've learned about, a person's ultimate work should be towards self-knowledge, towards really finding out what the self is, and finding out what reality is, how it works, and how you can transcend, the limitations that we've found ourselves in.
You and I come from completely different environments and experiences, and yet we are in the same state of consciousness. And we agree. We agree in very well, because we are in the same stage of a conclusion of our time here. See how cruel this world is. Everything is created and everything is birthed to die. How cruel is that? You're born to die, and all that is will die. Your friends, your family, your parents, your wife, if humanity really thought about the situation we are in, they will not reproduce. Reproduce is to bring a new soul into this entire entrapment, and to place them into the state of death, decay, and aging, and disease. How cruel is that? So I think when the person has reached a final stage in which he's finally ready to ascend, to become more than just this, he can no longer trap a new soul into matter, because he understands the fragility, the deficiency, and the corruption of these bodies. And so anti-natalism, I believe, is part of this advanced spirituality, where you are now working in yourself to access the God within, to become more than just mortal in a body, in a planet, but to become the universal consciousness that transcends the cosmos, that becomes the multiverse, that becomes eternity itself.
Yeah,
that's the final stage.
Yeah, the only the only time that bringing a new human into awareness would not be an kind of a harmful act is if it's in a society that's full of people that are already self-aware. And if it's it's a group of people that if I couldn't even imagine even how or why there would be a community like that. But if there was humans on the earth that were completely, had all the, the self-knowledge that these old masters, that people talk about have, and they were aware of non-material awarenesses that wanted to experience physicality for a bit. If there was those kind of, fantastical, environments, I could see maybe that happening. But the way it is now, like you said, in the way the culture is, it isn't a good thing, because at the very best, you bring people into a world where they're having to constantly struggle just to survive. And
exactly.
And that I don't believe that. I mean, I don't believe that the way things are in our society is, just the way it should be or the way it has to be. I have a belief that there's a way that humanity could live in higher, forms of awareness. I mean, if you look at the way the entire globe is with different cultures, there's such a disparity in, I mean, I hate to sound like, a socialist, but there's such a disparity in wealth and in opportunity between different groups, even within one country, that if there was, even if there was some kind of one, world government, some kind of benevolent, governing body, it does seem like there would be enough resources for humanity to live simply. Not for everyone to live with abundance and not for everyone to live like kings, but for everyone to be able to survive and to not suffer. You know?
Think about the people that live in third world countries. They are the ones that breathe the most. Let's say you're living in extreme poverty in a cardboard house. There is no food. There is no housing. There is no resources, and yet you make 10 kids which have to feed themselves from trash and beg in the streets. Think how the state of mind of that person or that man and woman that brings 5, 10 kids into poverty. Mm-hmm. And doesn't think that the more children they bring, the more they're going to trap them in poverty, and those children will reproduce very young and then continue the cycle of poverty and disease and death. Humanity doesn't realize that the more they are of them, the more they can be exploited by corporations, by governments, by taxes, by the system, because it is, if a corporation, there is 100 people for one single position, they can exploit you, they can take advantage of you. And if there is less population, less people, then there is more opportunities, more space, more housing, more resources for everybody. So the more population, the more pressures for survival, and the more difficult for humanity to gain more consciousness. To actualize itself, you know what I mean? So yeah.
I was gonna say, you know what I think is my most controversial viewpoint that I think I have is that I think I never would have thought that I would think like this, but I'm against birth control because I don't like the message it sends to people that I really feel like people that sexuality shouldn't have ever become a recreation for humanity. I really think that the idea that it's that human sexuality is just something to enjoy with no strings attached. That idea that is supported by condoms and birth control, it really sounds archaic even when I say it, but I really think that in a really mature society, I really don't know why you would think that's a good idea for people to use those energies in people for entertainment and being like, oh yeah, there's like no bad effect of everyone just going out and having sex with no repercussions. It's like, no, I kind of think those instincts and powers are kind of, meant for something high level, and that if you use them in a frivolous way, it can't be good,
Humanity currently is in an animal state, which means they are here just to reproduce and to feed themselves and to, just reproduce and survival. And being that they are here for survival, they have to reproduce, and reproduction means sex. And I agree and disagree with you. I encourage all the type of things to prevent procreation, but at the same time, I agree with you that sex should not be something that you do for recreation. In a spiritually involved society, sex will be an act of spirituality, not something that you do for fun. But again, a society, a civilization such as this one, which is an animal, humanity, which is not evolved, I imagine that they seek pleasure, they seek desire instead of discipline and self-evolution.
Yeah, and all of the all of the bodily and physical pleasures, not just sex, but drugs and food and adrenaline seeking things. Those are all things that maybe, people don't think of them as negative. And I wouldn't say people shouldn't do any of those things. I've done all of those things, but they're things that do pull you in more to the material world. They anchor you more into a more base level of thinking. if you spend all your time seeking adrenaline, seeking money, seeking sex, seeking, physical or even mental satisfaction, you won't have the energy or the time to devote to self-knowledge, to kind of cultivating that inner awareness and being able to go into to what's inside stillness. There's like one of the things that people who okay, so
let's take that break.
Okay, so let's it's really hard to not get kind of lost in all the different things that your book makes me think about. So
that's what I was telling you. The journey from this book will lead into all kinds of branches.
Okay, so
it's a long conversation.
Yeah, so it probably will be a 2-part thing, not just because of the book, but because I always like talking to Alfredo. He's always been someone I first talked to you back in probably like 2015 or 16, around there maybe. Yeah, and it was, during a time where I was going through a really hard spot with kind of my mind being rearranged by trying to go through this process we're talking about of, deconditioning yourself, but, and so, I think that we're going to have to just keep having these podcasts to kind of pull out these ideas. 'Cause I think me and you, there's not many platforms where you can get these kind of ideas out there and have, people listen to them. And, I don't care if people halfway through this podcast turned it off because they don't want to hear about these kind of things, because there is people that do listen that want to hear. So, we don't have to think about it, but
we are discussing the future. We are discussing the ideas and the beliefs that humanity one day will have. Humanity will be in this state of being that you and I are in about 100 years. In about 100 years, you and I will be modern. It's like when you look at somebody 40, 50 years ago with very, very modern ideas, Back then they were out of place, crazy, but now they seem normal. We are the future. Just as this book and just as the Nobody is, we are a projection of the future coming into the past, providing this new insight to the observers. So we are necessary for the future.
So so your book, the story through, the first, half of it is the story of this awareness going through the process of taking its consciousness from the state of, omnipotence and finding ways to limit itself.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, the story goes through these different stages of the different beings that are, descended from that awareness, and the kind of process of each of them, like knowing what their role is in, in the universe. And that's why, like I was saying, your book really reminds me of so many different old texts on these kind of subjects, because they talk about the same idea of a hierarchy of different beings that are responsible for different levels of existence. And maybe people could think of it as a way of the way humans in our world are responsible in a way for, tending to what the natural world is like. That we have enough influence over animals and plant life that we can cultivate things in a certain way, the same way that something above us can cultivate humanity in certain ways. And that's kind of where the later part of the book goes on to, where it's like this awareness descending itself into a limited physical body, and then the steps of the people along the way. There's, like I said, if I'm wrong about anything, correct me, but I'm just going to kind of try to walk people through, what the first part of it is. And it's the idea of this one awareness being divided into individuals who have their own identity, but are also recognize that they're a part of this one entity, that there's no real difference between them. And then when it gets down to them creating a physical human, or the ones that were maybe between human and spiritual beings, you have the idea of giants, or kind of supernatural humans, like people that were kind of like a human but augmented with abilities and things. And so once you get to the level of those and more flesh and blood beings being in the universe, then the story goes on to how those beings kind of try to find their way to either going towards developing in the material world, or trying to move back towards that awareness. And then there's kind of the overarching story that the original entity just kind of knows how things are going to play out, in the first place, right?
Yeah, so, for that entity to experience everything, he cannot be conscious that he is who he is, otherwise he will not be able to do so. He needs to fall asleep into these layers of lesser and lesser consciousness until he becomes unconscious that he is who he is. He just becomes this human being in this creation. He's just living and dying and reproducing and just part of this whole thing. He doesn't know where he came from, what he is. And this permits him a time to experience a time of millenniums and experience all those things he wanted to experience, which otherwise would have been impossible under his omnipotent condition, which is death, limitation, suffering, restriction, So yes, and then eventually, when the being finally is satisfied, when the being is finally satisfied, then naturally the stage is set in a way that he triggers his awakening. Drama to experience, into becoming what he was pure to becoming what he is. Was to begin ascending into omniscient, godlike being that he was once. A universe, we could say in the story, like an hologram, like a dream bubble, where certain expressions or being can be experienced. Once these expressions are experienced, then the universe is collapsed or ended. So let me continue reading the next paragraphs.
Okay. Yeah.
In each adventure, dream, and construct of the universe or universes he had produced and experienced before, he will always commence as if each is a first creation, meaning as if nothing had existed prior to this current creation. A primordial principle as in singularity. Therefore, the narration of this beginning is in reality the beginning. In the commencement, nothing and everything was at the same time, because the nothing and the everything existed in one same point of expression, even as a potential, the power or practical activity of action of reality. The commencement existed the potential of the eternal action, without having a beginning or an end. It always was. The potential will acknowledge itself to existence, being aware of itself. And it, being aware of itself, expressed as a reflection of itself, the manifestation of the expansion of natural space in which it existed. The natural space was the reflection of the consciousness, recognizing the consciousness as a point of existence. The natural expansion of space was without beginning, without end, without frontiers in the extension of itself. just as the one that was reflecting it into existence. Now let's talk about that. What is this space? What is this space in which we exist? What is a space?
Yeah, that's that's the same question as saying, when you have a dream, what is the space that dream, exists in? One of the things that I always think about from that book that I was telling you about was that during one point, the teacher would tell the person, think about when you're having a dream, how would you be able to find the end of your dream? If you have a dream of you being, on Earth or in any kind of space, there's no way you're going to be able to, even if you say you were lucid dreaming and you shot out as fast as you could, this is kind of something that kind of comes in at a part of your book. But if you're able to travel, as fast as you could think of, you're not going to get to the end of your dream. You could get to the end of things that you create in your awareness. You could get to the end of a boundary of, what's created, but the space that world exists in isn't a space. It's, it's something that it doesn't, it's not the same. It's not that like, the kind of modern Western world wants to describe the universe and our existence in kind of mechanical terms, but they're slowly kind of moving towards accepting that material reality is slippery, that it's not made out of of solid material, that it's made out of energy, that it's made out of vibration, and that it's that they're going to eventually slowly move to the idea that, our waking reality isn't any different than a dream or an apparition or a hallucination. It's a mental projection.
Basically, the universe is a mental projection, an hallucination that we collectively are having. Those that are away from this hallucination are able to stop the dream and ascend out of it. Those that are too tame or too constrained by the dream reality, they remain here, and living and dying because they cannot overcome the illusion that the dream is. They're still bound by the parameters of this reality, and therefore to throw them into the nothingness to become creators is not possible. Basically, it's a consciousness that has to develop from the basic state into a higher state of consciousness, which is able to create realities like this. Once you become godlike consciousness, then you know that the nature of this universe is that of a dream. And therefore, you can overcome the dream, you can overcome the universe. You're able to create universes and dreams and dimensions such as this one, because you understand that the entire cosmos is just energy, space, which is within oneself. So what is a space? Space, time, consciousness. Those are aspects of consciousness. So this book allowed me to awaken into the realization that this universe is just me imagining it. Because the space is basically an aspect of my consciousness. Time is basically matter movement between day and night and activity, and so it's an aspect of myself too. Matter creates time. Time is consciousness too. So space, time, and energy is also an aspect of consciousness of my own being, which is used to create form, which is used to create all this we see. So.
Oh yeah. So one of the things I was gonna say was, I know you meant the book to be, how would you say? You meant for it to be consumed by anyone. You meant for it to be, to be publicly eventually out there, and for it to be an introduction for people to different ideas. But someone who has spent a lot of time reading about esoteric ideas and reading about the occult and mythology would recognize that there's a lot of things that you put into the book as influences that are kind of homages to, these old stories, or, like, how would I say, like, the book is really, anyone who's spent a lot of time studying the things that we do just is constantly like, oh yeah, you turned a lot of ideas that are in, old esoteric traditions, and you put them into the story in a real organic way, to where it's like, for instance, like even the numbers that you use for different things, the significance of them, and the symbolism of the different trees and fruits, and the abilities that they got, the characters got from getting these. And there was just a lot of things where I thought, like, it's it just, I don't know, was that how the thing, I think the main thing I want to ask you was the process of writing the book. It took a pretty good amount of time, but when you were going through it, did you have to, what was it like getting into the mood to write the book, like to progress in getting it put together? Did you have to meditate before you did it?
Basically, I mean, imagine this. It took 22 years. That's a lifetime of a human being. That's imagine a 22-year-old person. That's a long time. Basically, I only did it when I felt like it. I only did it when I felt like my intuition, my instinct say, sit down and write. Basically, it was, like I said, like a natural intuition. I didn't think about it. I just let it go through, let it flow for me. It was an aspect of my meditation, my astral projection. I love to go deep into the universe. I love to go into the center of the sun, into the bottom of the ocean. I like to explore every aspect of reality through my meditation, through astral projection. So as you can see, sometimes what I write is like a meditation, that you can only experience without a body, without gravity, without the terrestrial. Basically, to be able to write this book, I had to experience aspects of reality which are not common in the normal day-to-day life, which is eating, sleeping, walking, working. I had to push my mind and my consciousness into other dimensions of mind and imagination, allow me to experience aspects of reality which are not possible within this construct we see as reality.
When I would describe your book, I wouldn't really be able to describe it as fiction completely, because even though the story is something you created, the ideas in it and the background of it and what goes on during the story and the information of it, there's too much of it that's close to like real traditions of self-knowledge, that it's kind of that's why I was saying that it really reads like an old book. It reads like an allegory, like an instructional story. Because one of the books I'll show you here, I think I might have mentioned it to you when I was talking to you sometime, but this one here, it's called Where Do We Come From? It might be flipped on the camera, but it's by It's by a guy named Ernst Muldashev. And this book is all about his trips to the Himalayas to try to find information about underground civilizations and the traditions of kind of pre-human races that eventually moved underground to escape cataclysms and, preserve knowledge and things. And so towards the end of the book, he gets to these people that give him information about how, if you see this thing here, I'll show you. You see this drawing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, so he shows how on the smallest one is like a human. And then he talks about how these people told him about these other races of people that were, these progressively bigger, almost in the same way that is in your story. Almost the same story of these beings, how, like, this is so weird. We're not gonna, okay, so we have a hard time limit of 2 hours and 30 minutes. That's where it's just going to shut off. We're not going to be able to record any more than that. But so because your book had so many things where I was like, we have to I want to really go through these step by step so that people who don't,
as long as you want to read. And then if you want to do another one next Sunday, we can.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, this book branches into many different types of things, It's just, you can go through many different things, very deep, very strange, and very interesting.
Well, the reason why I wanted to really take the time to kind of go through things step by step was that, I've been studying, things about ancient civilizations and, connections between different religions and spiritual traditions. I've been studying that my whole life. And so when I eventually read your book, I don't want people to think that you just can't, like, that this is all just like, I don't, how would I say, like, I don't want to say that you, just took, things from everywhere else, but you didn't just come up with these ideas. Like, the ideas that you use for your book are ideas that are there in kind of the collective awareness. And so
let me just say that the book for the general public is just fiction. Just imaginary fiction book. For those in the know, it's a story about the past. It's a story about consciousness, the universe, and the nobody, and strange things that only those in the know will understand. Only somebody like you will understand. So there is another true and another reality. It is a strange story of what I believe it was the past. That came through me through remote viewing and astral projection, and my universal story of the very ancient past. It's a mixture of so many things. So there is true in it. It's like, just say you're correct. This is a instruction book for those minds that will come after me, after you and I are gone, for them to begin the initiation of their own progression into becoming one day stellar men, men of the stars, to the area where we are going. But when those people, those human beings, they're going to be just individuals that will come through time, just as before. They will understand this book, and it will lead them into many different branches of thinking and ideas and history that will allow them to evolve into what they're supposed to become. So this story is for them as much as for the people who wants to read it today, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit more information about what I was talking about with this book. So the reason why this the person who wrote the book was a Russian ophthalmologist, which is someone who studies eyes. He's like an eye doctor. The reason why he did this trip to Tibet and the Himalayas was that he had some kind of way of studying the structure of eyes and the dimensions of people's eyes, where he came up with this theory that people in the northern Indian and Himalayan region were genetically the closest to every other people on Earth. His theory was that was kind of the center of human origin, and that it wasn't, Africa the way that a lot of other scientists thought of. And so through those kind of ideas and him going there and talking to spiritual teacher there, that's how he got onto these ideas of the underground beings from these earlier civilizations that were preserving knowledge and kind of entombing themselves in these underground spaces. And I thought this was really interesting. If you look at this one page, this drawing, the title of this drawing is him, just him.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what I was gonna say was that the story that this Russian guy got from these spiritual teachers was almost completely in parallel to the story that's in your book. That there was a race of beings that were these, that existed in a more subtle energy form that was more subtle than physical. That was kind of a spiritual form, and that over time they created, more, denser, more physical forms of beings, and that this kind of de-evolution eventually ended up with humans, but that the ones that came before the descendants of humans were, hidden in these underground spaces that were protected by some kind of higher technological force, and that the only people that knew about it were these groups in Tibet and these higher spiritual groups.
This story about the giants was something that came through my intuition. That's what my intuition told me. As I allow it to access the universal consciousness, the totality is what it told me to say. Is this inner self that can access that told me there was a time in which these entities existed. There were giants. There were a mixture of a more advanced spiritual entity, which was a derivation of something else that was even more advanced. And when we look back in history, for example, the pyramids, the pyramids are a summary of mathematics, astronomy, architecture, a knowledge that only now we can understand and we can able to maybe replicate. The pyramids are basically time capsules of the knowledge and capacity that existed at a prior time in human history. Civilization now doesn't understand or knows what happened in the previous time. Otherwise, the Abrahamic religions and current structure of history could not operate. And therefore, the current civilization could not be maintained. So humanity is being deceived to understand that there was a time in which civilization was way more advanced. And so, on that remote view, through my meditations, this is what I saw, these giants that once existed. And so I put it on the book as a fiction, But I think this is why it matches aspects of the ancient past, because there are aspects of true in it.
Yeah, it's that's why I really do think that's why I was really interested in how you felt when you were sitting down to write it, because I knew that what you were pulling out of the ether, what you're pulling out of the collective consciousness, that you were really giving yourself up, you were being a vessel to some kind of
Yes.
awareness to tell this story, because it's not like you said, it's fiction because it's your own creation, but because it's kind of playing with forms and ideas and characters that people recognize. Sometimes, like, you have, I mean, if anyone's ever done any kind of reading on old books and old spiritual texts, like you have there's Prometheus, you have like Lilith, there's Lucifer, there's the Abraxas, there's all these names that people might have, they might have certain like ideas associated with them, but the story is a world. It's one world that's it's not it's almost like the way the Avengers, these new movies take all these old characters from mythology and kind of repackage them in a new way to show a story. That's kind of what you've done with these characters that maybe haven't gotten a lot of attention.
There were these characters like Lucifer, Prometheus, all these energies, which these are characters, are energies, frequencies of thinking. They're special. They're part of the entire puzzle that can allow you to discover what this reality is. It was important for me to place them in there and create them as a new character in the story. So when they initiate, the reader in the future will come, it will attract them to that character, Prometheus, Praxis, Lucifer, Quetzalcoatl, so they can begin researching all those energy frequencies and access all those branches of knowledge.
And
so it was, yeah.
And all of the characters that you chose, all of them represent a certain ideal. They represent an ideal of freedom and of kind of breaking out of the bounds of how would I put it? They all represent progression and the idea of going beyond the forms that you found yourself in, and they're all about returning to some kind of origin or rediscovering some kind of lost power and independence. Independence is almost, I think, is the biggest thing. All of those characters have to do with rebellion, in a way.
For this world to be experienced the way it's experienced now, we have to go into this very low regress stage of consciousness where we're just basically worried about breathing, surviving, and having just the next wealth and popularity within your environment. This is the way the world is now. Is the way this world is just too primitive, too base level. So right now, in order for us to experience this world, we had to regress into this stage of knowledge and consciousness, very basic. And now, as all these hundreds and thousands of years of this basic experience, which it was impossible to experience before, in an omniscient state, have been fulfilled, then the energy of information and consciousness will accumulate enough to where certain human beings, such as someone like the nobody, will begin to awaken to the true natural self and rediscover who we are, begin to arise into a more complex, sophisticated civilization. The aim of a last ending this experience, this universe. Because this universe is defective, evil. I mean, it's filled with, when you see animals, for example, you see a lion eating the zebra, butcher said, pulls out the guts, the heart, everything. It just consumes the other animal. Basically, wolf, for example, a wolf in another animal, or basically you have a situation where creatures must consume and destroy other creatures in order for them to sustain their own life. Even ourselves, we need to eat corpses and dead animals. We cook them, but we're consuming another life in order to sustain our lives. Mm-hmm. So when we see this universe, this planet, this nature, we can see its corruption. There is evil within its very structure. But this was necessary for us to experience a situation like this. And so in the book, the being eventually awakens and supersedes this universe and realizes who he was and gains all the information and knowledge from this entire experience. And then at the end, he destroys the universe because he knows it's a defective thing that should not exist. But it was necessary for him to understand certain experiences,
Hmm. So, you were talking about the end of the book, the ultimate kind of conclusion is for that original awareness to finish the journey through separation and limitation. And I mean, in the story, it's that being like experiencing like trillions and trillions of years of being, different beings and being limited and mortal. But I think let's take one more 3-minute break and then we'll do like the last part of the show. For the next little part, I wanted to touch on what I thought was an interesting part was, there's a part of the book where it kind of mirrors what our modern society is like, and then kind of goes into what would be kind of the near future things for society. And I kind of want to touch on the idea of there being, a human empire that's really against, religion and superstition, and that, treats spirituality as a rational thing, and that, uses scientific thinking and uses, human intuition and cleverness to figure out the problem of self, and that there's, this kind of higher organization of humanity that, tries to move beyond tribalism and nationalism. So let's take a quick 3-minute break. And then I want to talk a little bit about that. Okay.
Let's also finish reading the second page. There's a lot to talk about still.
Okay. All right. I'll be back.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about how your book goes into kind of the future of modern people was that it really gave me flashbacks to when I read about the lore behind have you ever heard of the board game or tabletop game Warhammer? No. It's kind of a game where they use all these pieces, and it's kind of a fantasy game about humanity in the far future, and they wrote a really detailed backstory to it. And I don't know how, but one time I got into watching YouTube videos of what the lore behind it was, and it's pretty close to the kind of things that we talk about. It's about I'll just give you the gist of it, and you can kind of tell me what you think of it. Remember, this is for a game. This is just for a game that people like. It's a strategy game where you have little army pieces, and then you roll dice, and you have rulers to try to, show where you hit people. And so the only reason I got into knowing about it was that some of my friends got into it, and I never really did. So the gist of the lore is that supposedly in some faraway past, these shamans who were at a time where humanity was really adept at spiritual knowledge and abilities, they were able to see that the course that humanity was going on. And so this group of shamans, I think it was that they essentially committed some kind of ritual suicide to project their energies ahead to go into this one person who would be born in the future. And this one person would be some kind of savior of mankind that would bring them into some higher age and, bring them through this big turmoil that humanity was supposed to go through. And so the story is that this guy is born like a normal human, but, through whatever circumstance, becomes enlightened to, inner alchemy and all these different things. And they end up living, like a they're kind of immortal in a way, but in the way that, you kind of use in your book where they're immortal in that they live forever, but they have to kind of live as a normal person, and they can be injured and such. And this person, through their knowledge and awareness, kind of stays in the shadows and hides, and then through different circumstances, eventually gains a kind of leadership position and kind of institutes a whole new empire of humanity that tries to stomp out religion and superstition, and kind of explains spiritual topics through reason. Like the whole idea behind that new empire is that like everything can be explained, and like they all the things that people thought were supernatural, they deal with face to face. And so the rest of the story in this game is humanity dealing with like extra dimensional entities, and them moving through the universe, fighting these things that come from other dimensions. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Right now, humanity has reached some technical development. They have cars, planes, atomic bombs. But they don't have the spiritual understanding to how to guide these new systems and technical understandings. So when humanity finally develops into truly advanced, spirituality and science will become one. It will be one single system. You will not be able to do one without the other. It will be a complementary ideal. For example, today we have nukes, we have advanced weapons. Humanity has discovered these things and how to operate them, how to create them. But yet they lack the spiritual understanding, as they have still very limited understanding, and we can see that through the Abrahamic religions, which limit the consciousness of the individual and the nations of the world. When humanity finally evolves, transcends this current brute animal states, they will be able to use reason, spirituality to guide science. They will be able to use the new discoveries and the technical developments to enhance their own universal well-being, to develop a new age of civilization, which will be kinder and more towards positive outcomes. Today we have all these different national states and forces fighting against each other for the limited resources of the planet. All this technical development is being used for selfishness. A few people can enrich themselves, a few nations can hoard all the resources while the rest of the nations live in poverty and war. So right now, although we have technical understanding of science, technology, we do not have the spiritual understanding to guide all this new knowledge. When humanity finally reaches a state of proper evolution, they will have a new skill, the capacity to use science, spirituality, and intellect in one single stage, and therefore create a new civilization.
Mm-hmm.
This civilization will not be as the one we have today, transcend national states, tribalism, religion, races. Humanity will become a universal being. They will no longer see themselves as nations, but as a planet. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now Earth will be home, not a continent, not a nation, but Earth. That's a huge bridge between one state of consciousness where you are a national from a little tiny country and a little god and a small territory. And now you think as a planetary being, cosmic being. You know, now you are a giant. You know, huge different state of consciousness from this tininess to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think that there was any civilizations in the past that did have that kind of awareness that was common? Because the thing that it makes me think about is people that talk about pyramids and megalithic civilizations that look really similar in different spots of the globe. That could be a sign that in the past there might have been some kind of widespread civilization that had a more bigger, greater control over the environment. Because one of the things that a real kind of practical thing that I heard about was that in the Amazon, there's spots of the deep jungle that have soil that isn't natural. That there's large tracts of soil that seem to be, engineered, in a way to grow certain things. And so,
I think
it might be hopeful, but I kind of have a feeling that maybe there could have been civilizations that had that awareness and maybe they mismanaged the power that they had.
there was a time in which it was a universal civilization, and this is why you see pyramids and similar structures around the world. People were planetary. The way they developed themselves were not in the same way we did. The technological uh, part was not as the one we have today, but it was more like a spiritual. I think there was a time in which they could travel through dimensions. Perhaps the way I describe the story is one aspect of how we came to be. We just manifested this universe and we forgot who we were and then we became part of it. We could also, there's also another theory, I think, that we could also have jumped from a different dimension or a different universe and saw this planet and it was out of billions of universes, this planet, this universe and this planet itself had the capacity to sustain a life like us. And so we jump into this planet and we just hijack it from the creatures that were here at one time. Did you watch the movie Stellar? That came out a
Interstellar?
few years ago. Interstellar.
Yeah, yeah. I watched it in theaters. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it was. They basically as the movie progresses, they try to move into another planet, inhabited. I mean, it could be also that we came from another dimension or another galaxy, and we saw this planet and we inhabited. Eventually, some cataclysm happened, and we lost the technology and the connection to our past, and we end up in this situation where we are finally rediscovering technology and systems which at one time already existed.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever we've done to this point is very likely that has already been done in the past, perhaps in a different form.
Yeah,
You know,
one of the things that I think about with these ancient civilizations that people say there's no explanation for why they disappeared. Like, why did they build all these elaborate cities and they had all this thriving culture, then one day they were gone? One of the theories that I always liked is that there was some civilizations that got to that high level of awareness. That, when you see some of those cities, like, I can't remember what the name of it was, but the city in South America that's, near on top of peaks, and it's all built with terraces for farming, and was it Chichen Itza? I think it was. No, it couldn't have been that one, but it's one of those cities. But maybe that the people that had those civilizations eventually got to the level of development that, say, when there was some kind of when they knew a cataclysm of the earth was coming, maybe instead of going underground, they could have had the ability to move into a higher level of being, into some kind of a state of living that was non-physical, where they had the awareness where it was going to be so hard to maintain a physical presence, on the earth, and maybe they didn't want to go into do the alternative, which would be going underground to escape, different disasters. And
it's possible that you have very advanced human beings that could just transmute their bodies into energy and consciousness and just leave Earth. It's also possible that another aspect of humanity, which was not so advanced, just went underground and built deep and wide cities on all continents. I mean, there is rumors about ancients building cities underground. So it's possible that both things happen. One where humanity that was evolved enough escaped through ascension, and then there was another type of humanity which just went underground and spared themselves from destruction. But it seems like, from what we see with the pyramids, is that there was a time in which humanity was very advanced, but they did not use the technical and spiritual knowledge to create cars and planes. They used it to develop themselves internally. And so they build pyramids, they build temples, they build things that I think that matter more. They understood the temporary nature of life. So they didn't waste their time on what we're doing now. They use their time to push themselves into what you and I are trying to do, which is spiritual liberation. I don't know. Let me continue reading another piece of the book so we can continue creating conversation.
Yeah, we have about maybe 15 minutes more left before we got to start wrapping it up.
Oh.
Yeah, just the only reason is because we only have a certain amount of time on the recorder before it'll fill up. That's the only limit that we have. But
this book, I mean, we have enough material to maybe next Sunday or whenever you feel like it. Second part of 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? You choose it when.
Yeah.
But so far, this is the conversation we had, you and I, has been very, very interesting, and I'm sure people that will enjoy it.
Well, I'm going to be doing my podcast, every week from now on. So, even once we finish the book, we'll still keep doing them we have I'm sure we have material for, an infinite amount of podcasts.
I mean, yeah, this book can go to so many different things. So you tell me when we do a second part.
Yeah.
So let me just read another piece.
All right.
The one that was conscious and was completeness in all the senses of the world, full of perfection and aspiration. The expansion in which he existed was empty in the physical sense, for no matter existed there, but filled with mental activity and infinite waves of imagination and potential, reflecting in this way the wholeness of itself in applicative action, arriving to be within himself a perfect state of reality, containing complete autonomy, and it will manifest itself in all spaces of the natural expansion in which he inhabited. There was no up or down, no distance, no nearness. He was everything for all that was. For it was in all spaces of space in a single moment of one eternal now. Now think about this. Imagine yourself in a blackness There is no points of reference, just complete infinite blackness. How would you know up or down, left or right? How would you know you're here or not there? How would you know it's day or night or what time is it? So this paragraph tells you how time, space, and locality begin, you know? If you're in an infinite nothingness, there is no up or down, or left or right. How would you do it? How would you determine it?
Yeah, that it's a kind of a freedom that you never experience in normal existence, because that kind of awareness, even though what it really reminded me of is the experience that I've gotten from Kriya Yoga through stilling the inner energies and getting to that point where there's completely no vibration from thought or awareness or sensation. And the highest level of that I gotten to, I, completely, lost the awareness of, my body or of there being any kind of a, locality or any kind of spatial awareness, and becoming just kind of melting into, infinite space. And that kind of sensation, I think, is something that in your book you really let people know what that is, through the experience of the narrator.
In my meditation, sometimes I tend to place myself in an infinite space, in a blackness, and I try to expand myself into the entirety, into the totality. I want to reach infinitum, access all the energy, all the space, all the time within the nothingness. It's a type of meditation which I use to expand my own inner being, to keep pushing myself farther and farther and farther away, and to absorb the totality of the totality. That blackness, is I mean, to be able to place your mind, your consciousness in that blackness, that infinite nothingness, it's an experience that you normally will never get in the physical form, where you're seeing and touching things. It's only when you place yourself in that state of mind that you're able to access other modes of reality, thinking that otherwise you cannot do so. Because you do, I mean, this planet, this little room, I mean, does not allow me certain experiences. It allows me to sit here, to touch this, to feel this, but to be able to place my consciousness in that blackness, that nothingness, and to experience that state of being where I'm not able to place myself in any reference or point in time, allows me the access to that state of being, that I will never be able to reach. And this is what allows me to write stuff like this. I'm virtually accessing things that are inaccessible under current natural conditions of the normal physical reality, which allows you to know other things that otherwise you will not be able to do. This is what I call the path to becoming God. To be able to do things that the normal human beings will never be able to even imagine to do. And this book allows you to think in that perspective, which opens your mind to becoming what this being at the end became, This being at the end recognized himself as God and was able to escape the universe in material form. What do you think, Nila?
Yeah, and I think the book really should just be an introduction to all of these things. If someone's reading it that didn't really know about these kind of topics before, it should just be kind of like the first step for them to start going on being more curious about things and not being one thing that I feel like the book kind of pushes is the idea that you shouldn't be afraid of the taboos about spirituality, of like there being things that you shouldn't discuss, or that, things that you shouldn't, ideas that you shouldn't study, and that there's, the idea that everything in creation is a mental manifestation, and that everything is kind of part of oneself, takes away, any kind of idea that there's something out there that's going to punish you if you don't follow, the rules of some kind of more powerful entity. The whole message of the book behind it is empowering for the individual, and to say that, that there's no being that's beyond you, because you are, a fractal part of the creator of everything. And just the same way that if you have a nightmare of a monster that's attacking you, it might be doing something to you, but it's not something more powerful than you, and you have some kind of control that you can exert.
Think how restricted the mind of, let's say, a Christian is. They cannot really think outside the parameters of the religious system or their God, because if they do so, then God will send them to hell. So that limits their capacity to supersede that state of mind, that thinking. It deprives them to become a full human being. That's a trap. They've been tricked to deceive from becoming the full potentiality of their being, which is within. So when you think as God, when you think as the totality of the wholeness of all that is, then there is no one to punish you. There is no one to restrict you. And there is no more taboo. To go into taboo subjects, to go into the darkness, is to reach states of being that otherwise you could not do so. But you're no longer restricted by programming of religion. Now you know you are the totality. You are the full being. You're God. Therefore, there's no taboo. And when there is no longer any taboo, then you can reach the root of the knowledge of the truth, which is that this whole reality is an illusion. I think some religions, like the Abrahamic religions, were created by magicians, people like you and me, which knew what was going on, because there's no other way. They were attempting to restrict humanity, to discover that this world is not real. They wanted that humanity to take this world as reality, and therefore create this state of civilization we have now. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. You know what I mean? If there were free thinkers, minds that had no taboo, where they would go anywhere in different systems of thinking, then you could not restrict them to create this type of a civilization. You're so bound by just the basic state of being,
Mm-hmm. And I think the overarching society that's in control right now is kind of struggling with how to make the transition between the older kind of bound to materialism worldview, and that kind of transformation into recognizing the non-material and being, more comfortable with things that don't fit into these rules and bounds that we've been living with. Because, I think the fact that things like psychedelics are becoming more common and slowly becoming more legalized and things, and with the internet, being around for long enough that, there's almost no information that you can't find, if you look hard enough.
This is why people like you and me is necessary. Somebody like you and me, or like the nobody, where there is no taboo, there is no forbidden. You go just deep through and just destroy everything, collapse everything, and build a new order of things. But nobody's chaos. In order for him to introduce a new order of things, you have to bring an end to the old things. And that can only be done through chaos, through energies and ideas and forces which break down the whole thing and just allows it to rearrange itself into a new form. That's what the nobody is. The reason governments try to restrict psychedelics. You know, I have never used drugs. I don't believe in, I need them to do what I do. I can use meditation. But I'm a rare being, you know. I think psychedelics have their own place in human evolution. There's people that are too restricted in their mind to be able to do what we do. So sometimes psychedelics or ayahuasca or LSD or this type of stuff can allow them to break free from that mold, that parameter of view. And so governments attempted to make this thing illegal because they want to maintain this status quo, this current civilization of hate and war and evil and devils and darkness, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna have to start wrapping up pretty soon here, but I was gonna say, isn't it interesting how in the last couple of years, mainstream scientists and physicists kept putting out statements talking about how, simulation theory might be true, and we have evidence that reality might be the same as computer code. And the thing that I always found interesting when those kind of news stories would come out is they never touched on the idea of if reality is a simulation. They never got into the idea of, well, wouldn't there have to be someone that put it together? Like, wouldn't there have to be some kind of intelligent source that is kind of separate from that simulation to put it together? But I never read anything that would touch on that. It was always just about how reality is so close to what we can create with simulations, and we could eventually get to a point where you can't, differentiate what's real or not. But they wouldn't get close to that other idea.
I think humanity needs Buddha, needs meditation. You cannot really understand how the universe operates or how it was manifested without meditation, without astral projection. I mean, it is only through meditation that you begin to understand how a planet, a cosmos, an apple exists, Like, for example, I can close my eyes and I can create an apple. And if I train myself enough, I can feel it. I can even open my mouth and taste it and feel it just like an apple. I'm able to do that because of how much I have trained myself to do it. And through the book, I was able to evolve myself enough to understand that the nature of the illusion of this world. I know that it's equal to a dream. And I know that my subconscious is manifesting it somehow. And it's only not me, but it's also the collective humanity which is manifesting it. Just like when you are in a dream, the dream is just manifested for you. You're there. You have a little planet, a little environment. If you're not aware you're in a dream, you don't know how the dream came to be, but it's there. It's your subconscious that is manifesting the dream, that you cannot know unless you become conscious in the dream. Humanity needs to become conscious that this planet, that this universe is us. They're not awake within the dream. And so the point of the nobody is to awake them. This is a dream, that is an illusion, that this is a temporary state, that they can transcend this state of being. And when they transcend and overcome illusion of this world, then they can begin taking godlike capacities to change and shape reality according to our will. Humanity right now is asleep. They think this world is real, and because they never meditate, they never go internally, they cannot understand that there is no God. That is us who is doing it. And as long as they think that it's a God, they can be manipulated through religion, through exterior forces, through exterior belief systems, into a certain state of mind. So they will never be able to change the world, to change civilization, and to move forward, So that's what the nobody is, the awakening of humanity.
And I think we're gonna have to leave it at that for now, and get ready for part 2 in a little while. But I think. But I think the overall message there is, like I said, independence and, taking responsibility for yourself. as a being that can't be enslaved, you know, a being that has the ability to create its own world. You know, I think that's the ultimate message that goes behind all that. But yeah, so we're gonna have to wrap things up here. We're getting to the end of our tape. Okay, so I'm gonna add in a link for the Discord group that you have going, that has a pretty good amount of people on there. And if people go onto that Discord channel, they can find where the book is, and they could talk to you if they want, or they could talk to the people that we have on there. Everyone's pretty welcoming, right?
Yeah, let me just say that the book, the PDF, will be on the room that has the name. The History of the Forever Time is basically the room that the PDF will be. And if you have any questions, you want to talk about the subject, just pop into the Discord, and we'll be there.
Okay, so that link will be under in the description for wherever you're going to see this. And okay, so that's going to be it. And thanks for listening to the Magic Yogi Podcast. And we're going to be back with a part 2. Hopefully not in too long, but we'll be back, because I think we barely even scratched the surface about, what the book is about and such. But yeah, we'll be back again soon. And thanks a lot for coming on here, Alfredo. You got your ideas and the work you've put in to, expanding people's minds is an inspiration to everyone, I think.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, man.
You too. Goodbye.
All right. We'll talk again soon.
Bye.